I'm
Sure.
Nav Gill. I'm on the product marketing team for our application security group of products. I'll be hosting today's panel discussion. And joining me today is Adam Rocker, a key player on the application security product management team here at OPSWAT, focusing on third-party integrations. As Adam says, he loves to build solutions that meet the customer where their data is and help to secure it. And we have a very special guest today, Buu Lam. He's the community evangelist for F5 DevCentral. Now, DevCentral, whether through community.f5.com or through in-person or through forums, is connects customers and partners to solve problems. And this is where innovation happens. As an evangelist who loves to talk about anything around enterprise architecture and how to make security an integral part of it. This whole thing started when we commissioned Dark Reading to do a webinar, a survey for us. And in that survey, we found some stuff that we was kind of expected, but still a little surprising because we haven't really seen the needle move over the years. We've been doing these surveys. We did one in 2021, one in 2023, and we found some. And we'll talk about some of the new and emerging threats that I mentioned, but I want to take like 5-10 minutes to go over some of the findings in the report and get the opinions of our speakers. So one thing we found was that 75% of the people were real, or 3/4 of the organizations were concerned, right, about web application security or application security in general and cyber attacks, whether they're APTs or botnets or DDoS. But only about 17% of the organizations were implementing the defense in depth strategies, the best practices. Now, the surprising thing is that over the years, these numbers are kind of consistent. It's in the high 80s to the 90s, where people are like, oh, we are very, very concerned. They do know, and quite a few of them know about the best practices, and yet they're not implementing them. So why is this? Like, what is it that prevents organizations from being able to implement the best practices that would help alleviate some of this concern and put those basic guardrails in place? So, Boo, Adam, or maybe Boo, I'll go to you first.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. My thought about this is when I look at, say, retail purchasing, follow me here for a sec. When I look at Amazon, I shop Amazon, and when I go onto Amazon, it's like the products come to me. And so I might be thinking of something, and then I go open up Amazon, that evening, and then I all of a sudden see the things that I was only thinking in my head. I don't know how it figures it out, but those things are presented to me on there, and all I have to do is click, and then all of a sudden this product is at my door the next morning. And that has me thinking, when it comes to best practices, are we actually making it that easy for people to implement these best practices? We might describe best practices, and that's all well and good to write things down and say, hey, you should be doing these things in this way. But is it to the point where it's like Amazon, where the best practices actually come to you and all you have to say is, here's my credit card number, and go and do the best practices for me? This is my thought process there as to why we're not quite there yet, is that we talk a lot, but maybe we're not making it easy for people to do things.
Yeah, I want to tap into that Amazon thing. What we've done, through the market, through services like Amazon, is make things very simple, right? But at the same time, on the back end, the technical side, the threat surface has expanded, right? And so we have access to all of these cool services, whether it's for security or whether it's for usability or whatever. But when we're doing that, we're creating more ways for attackers to try to get in and mess with the data. And so, as our lives get easier, we're also maybe inadvertently opening up those channels for bad stuff to happen in terms of privacy, data security, that type of thing. Interesting.
Very interesting. So it's human behavior, or what we get used to, and we don't realize what's happening. Now, we also know that there's like new technologies coming in all the time, right? Like we call it the cat and mouse game, whether it's, and we'll talk about that in detail. And I do want to wait for that. But in general, like, oh, AI is, so I'm looking at some of the survey responses, some of them have a little bit of thought around it, like, oh, large language models can be exploited, or like they'll hallucinate, or people are using malware to feed or exploit our internal algorithms. But in general, like AI, it's like this big buzz hype plus like, oh, the cloud. So it's almost like a cat and mouse game. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I would say, there, especially with AI, right? There's all of the hype cycles that come and go, right? Whether it's this or crypto, and a lot of different things that we can latch on to. And what I think we have pulled out, of prior surveys as well as this one, is that there's blind spots, right? And when you're not paying attention to those things, because you still have to take care of your basic everyday security maintenance. Your security hygiene has to be something that is always taken care of, even while you're trying to pay attention to the latest thing in the hype cycle, right? And so it is a lot about making sure that you're still doing the stuff you need to do, and again, pay attention to all the new services and the new capabilities that you have access to, but look at them with a bit more of a security first focus.
Yeah, I would agree. Blind spots. I think right now we are potentially seeing what we saw with the emergence of public cloud, in that there's a lot of shadow AI going on. And this gets really scary because there's the very basic use cases of AI where, hey, it's just helping me write something, and it's improving, say, a document that I'm trying to do, or it's giving me some help on code. But where it gets really scary is when you are really trying to extract business value. You need to plug in your business information into it, and you're plugging in your enterprise data warehouse into there. You might be plugging in customer data into there. And
Right.
if there is somebody who's done something, hopefully not, fairly foolish, and plugged something in that is externally accessible into that, and IT and security, SecOps, was not aware of that, there's a visibility problem. And all of a sudden, that visibility problem is not just as simple as it was with Shadow Cloud. It is now extremely accelerated and has the potential for, if your entire enterprise data warehouse is out in the open, that's a huge problem, obviously. And so I think that's the scary part for AI. I see, I'm not going to name any names, but I see shadow AI going on all the time. Luckily, a lot of it doesn't look like there's any sort of enterprise data attached to it, but that's the challenge that I see right now when it comes to that, is visibility and not knowing that that's happening, let alone some of these applications that are kind of built by, there's nothing wrong with startups, obviously. However, there's compromises that are made, or decisions that are made with a startup, as far as speed versus security. And so I get it. When you're a startup and you need to deliver products out to an organization, maybe you're betting everything on this one big customer and you're rapidly trying to get stuff out to them. However, the security of your application might fall to the wayside. And then not only are you serving that customer, but you've got a whole bunch of maybe freemium customers out there as well, and they're plugging that application into their organization as well. Do you have visibility into all of the things that they're doing as well? So now you're putting information, maybe files are going out to them as well, and the security of that and things that are coming back from them, is that being secured, and do you have visibility into that? All sorts of things to look out for.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
sure.
really scary. And it's very telling that, and this is like, this was a survey of your peers. These are organizations in various industry, in banking, in insurance. And these are people, whether you're a security architect or a CISO, 3/4 of them had some sort of an attack in the past 12 months. So whether it was a malware attack or it was a compromise of credentials or it was a denial of service. But 3/4 of the organizations were aware, at least, because there could be potentially more that were not aware.
Yeah.
So
That
it
didn't know,
affects,
right?
right? So were you surprised at this number, especially based on what you said?
Me? No, I'm not. I mean, it's a little bit of a shock, but it's not a surprise, right? There's I mentioned blind spots earlier, and one of the things with blind spots, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, is with all the new technology that we have, we can't rely on all the old technology to secure it, right? There's always room for improvement in terms of the things that we do all of the time, like AV scanning, and
It's very interesting that you say AV scanning, Adam, because only 63% of the organizations were doing a basic scan with just like one AV.
yeah,
So,
and
and this
and
is
and that is scary, right?
yeah,
Because we know, and we talk about how effective things can be at various points throughout the network, and that when I think part of it is a little bit of a user education type issue where it's not just about endpoint, right? It's not the same view that we had 20 years ago, where if you install AV everywhere, you're going to be fine, right? But even before that, it was firewall. If you had a firewall, you were completely safe. But we have to update, as security companies, we have to update our technology and really update the level of education we give, because we can't just ship a product and say, here's something that will help you. We actually have to show them, help demonstrate the value so that they can get use out of the new technology that will help protect them, while they're using all this other new technology.
yeah.
When we touched on AI, but just there might be a little bit of conflation around AI, but just also just simple automation. It enables attackers to be able to do things a lot faster, and the amount of just spraying malicious files out there,
Yeah.
can happen so easily. And so when you're not applying protections where you could potentially apply them, something like an endpoint, there's a lag to that, right? It's not always immediate. And not only
Right.
is it not always immediate, but say you're an organization of 1,000 people or 5,000 people or 10,000 people. And so what are the chances that if that file did go through and it just sprayed some sort of huge distribution list, are all 5,000 machines, can we count on all of those to be able to catch all of that stuff at the endpoint? Maybe if you're super,
Right.
super confident, but there's also databases, maybe something is being uploaded to a database, maybe your file servers as well. Is there replication that's happening? Is that going out to a cloud drive that's getting replicated down as well? All sorts of areas. And so I think, we always talk about defense in depth, but like even more so, being able to have strategic points where you can apply all the security
Yes.
so that we can't trust just endpoints anymore. I think we've already gone past that point, but clearly from the data, we have not. So,
Right.
we need to revisit that and look at why are people not doing that?
No,
Yeah.
and I think Adam will walk us through it. But one of the things we've been trying to kind of put it out there that real-time endpoint scanning is not the same as static scanning. So when the files are coming in, you actually need to look at the static
Right.
scanning rates, and what most of the AVs put out there. Like it's a little bit of apples and oranges. You need to make sure that you're comparing the right thing and getting enough protection
Yeah.
that you
And
want.
having those ingress points, whatever type they are, having those covered, because it's, it can come in through any number of vectors, and you've also got partners to deal with, and external users. But yeah.
So we started talking about AVs, but I want to go back to Boo, what you mentioned. Like when security falls to the wayside, and so basically, essentially, people are not securing their entire software development lifecycle, right? It's great to get open source software. They're agile, so it's a whole thing: speed versus security. So, what are some of the things that the organizations can do or should be doing to mitigate that?
Mhm. And, I'll preface this by saying everybody means well. Like, I want to assume good intent and that people, as they're developing, they're doing their best and they're trying to secure in the best way that they know how. But sometimes there's situations where, number one, there might be a knowledge gap. So it just might be inherent that, hey, something I'm doing is not going to be up to the level that I need to develop for secure code. Maybe I haven't, um, as I incorporate packages from other providers or sources, how can I ensure the integrity of that? Um, Other people and how I plug in with other people, am I doing it in a secure way? Have I kind of applied the proper constraints to somebody that has access to my application? Maybe I've given them an API and I've expanded the scope quite a bit so that they're authorized to do way too much. There's all these sorts of aspects to it. So really, I think it comes down to automation still, twofold. I think there's an education aspect to it, and
Yeah.
for more adoption around this, we ultimately, maybe we shouldn't ever have to have any tools, but we'll never get to that point. So along the way, we need to educate. And if we do have tools, what are those tools looking at? And I think the first and foremost, most important thing that a tool should have is the ability to pry things open and to look inside and to be able to look at all aspects and find things that a human just can't see, or a human could never in a lifetime be able to look through that and understand all of that. Those are where technology can greatly accelerate our ability to protect. But it really starts with that visibility. If we don't know, if we can't see it, how
Right.
can we really buy the right product? Like, any one of these industry analysts can recommend all these tools to us, but if that tool is applied to only our basic level of understanding of what we need to protect, and there's all sorts of stuff that we don't know about, then we're no further ahead at that point. So I think we got to start with visibility, and we
Mhm.
got to start by identifying all the parts where and maybe there's parts we don't even know about, but all the parts of the tool chain in that life cycle of where we need to look, and then actually apply tools that you can abstract even more visibility out of that and look a level deeper, or no, multiple level deepers, and then start looking at solutions.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think everything starts with visibility, because if you don't have the visibility, you don't
Yeah.
know what to fix. And then comes in the right tools and how to fix it. And
Right.
well, this may be the perfect time to segue into best practices, because we've kind of already started talking about them, right? So we in the survey we also had a question on, hey, which best practices are you following? NIST or CISA or OWASP, and OWASP is kind of we the bread and butter of our solutions here, or at least for my part of the world. And yet only 27% of the people were following the OWASP best practices, which are very clearly delineated. Now again, like
Yeah.
NIST was higher at 53. So Adam, maybe like, why do you think that is, and what are some of the basic
Yeah.
things you're doing?
It's one of those survey questions that I really like, because it does make you think, right? We take all the things that we kind of assume that we knew about, a market segment or a customer profile. Um, NIST has been around forever, right? They kind of started the standards game. And if you've ever done anything with any work with a government agency in the U.S., you've heard of 800-53, right? You've heard of all the different things. I mean, it is concerning to me though that OWASP, for a survey that we sent to to web application security folks, that it was so low, because OWASP is such a integral part. I mean, I know for F5, you guys cover the top 10 web app, the top 10 API, and even some of the stuff on the file upload cheat sheet. So it's very pertinent to the audience that we were trying to capture. And I think I think again it comes down to a little bit more education, because the best practices are very closely linked to compliance. And compliance is the thing that says, did you do the best practices correctly? And the compliance has kind of come into popularity. It's followed that hype cycle several times. And what we see is that something new will come out and people will rush to meet that compliance, right, and check that box. And when you just look at it as checking the box, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get something that will give you a better level of security, but it doesn't, compliance doesn't make you secure, right? It's following all the best practices that will help you maintain compliance, and they really do give you a shortcut. I love not having to recreate the wheel, and things like OWASP, things like NIST to a certain extent, and then SANS or CIS now, they really do give you a very step-by-step practical. Here's the things to do to be more secure. But that's not that's just the start. It's the best practices to get you started toward more security maturity.
And what I would say about this too, regardless of what's more popular and what's more used, I think just the fact that somebody's just using something is important.
Yeah.
And I think we all know that, or we've all experienced where teams don't see eye to eye. And just to get to the point where multiple teams can just agree that we're going NIST, we're going OWASP, or whatever it is. I don't care, you can argue the benefits and positives and negatives of one or the other, but just getting people to agree that we're going to work towards something is more and more I realize how huge of a step that is. And it's never going to be perfect. It's a journey.
I'm going to steal that point, Boo.
Knock them out.
No, that is because we talk about partnership, right? And sometimes forget that the folks that we're helping, in these organizations, they have to partner as well internally and find some stuff. I don't know. I thought it was a great point.
Yeah. So no, I love how you guys described it. So compliance is not just a checkbox, right? It's actually following the best practices. And then it doesn't really matter which one, as long as you pick one, agree on it, and then follow it somewhat diligently.
Execute. Yeah, I mean, it's execution, right? And but it should be part of that cycle of you implement something and then you observe it, you make your recommendations and you improve. And having the visibility of what you've done, it helps uncover other areas that might be a blind spot that you can pay a little bit more attention to.
When you talked about regulations too, that makes me think of the business impacts of something like DORA. So I've had some conversations with European counterparts on my team, or broadly at F5, and DORA is a big subject. And DORA applies to not only folks within that region, but it applies to people wanting to do business economically with people in that region. So it has all these downstream effects to it. And so maybe whether it's NIST or whether it's OWASP, but maybe leveraging some of that. And if, going back to how do we get teams to come to terms with using one of these, when this is a good thing for a good benefit of regulations is that, number one, I get there's the visible benefits of regulations, but there's the benefit of if we can align one of those standards to something like DORA, where DORA is an initiative that's going to get budget because it is something that will prevent us from doing business if we don't do it. And if we can align NIST or if we can align OWASP top 10s to that, then we're all a little bit better off. We can work on that journey, and it's not a checkbox, but now we're on this gradient to get towards something like DORA. Right. But there's a tip for folks who are trying to get funding for that.
It's great.
And that actually did come up quite a bit in the survey. Like one of the reasons was budget, right? And maybe this is
Yeah.
wasn't planning to talk about, but this perfect segue. Um, one of the things was budget and convincing senior management. And I asked this question, like it helps us also position and educate people on the risks and why. In your opinion, what is the best thing people like a security architect or person responsible for security can do to convince their senior management, like, hey, this is worth it. Like we need the budget for this. What would be the
I,
most convincing argument?
I think the biggest, a big driver that we see is when people unfortunately don't pass an audit, right? Or
Mm.
there's some sort of pen test. Those are really great to help you uncover those blind spots, right? And it's a really good, effective tool, just to show, we've done the testing, and now, here, CEO, please, make the decision so that we can secure that gap. Boo, there's a lot of different things, but yeah, curious.
Yeah, in a similar way, I actually a couple weeks ago spoke to one of my counterparts in Europe, and they went through this with a bank, a financial company, and it was an audit. And they went through they weren't compromised or anything, but they went through an audit, and this team had when I'm speaking to the actual engineers who are managing our stuff. F5 owns Nginx, if folks weren't aware of that, and they were using a lot of Nginx open source. And the auditors came in and they said, no, we need you for the type of stuff that you're doing. We need you to
Yeah.
be on supported stuff. You can't be running the open source. So that actually helped that team, that customer, be able to come back to us and say, okay, we're ready to move on to the commercial product. We're ready. We have justified the value of getting support from you. And so, that's a scenario where it was reactive to an audit. And so maybe inversely, that might be a scenario where if you're director of security, you probably, to align to the business, you probably have to have a pretty good idea of where revenue comes from within the business. And so let's say you're in North America, or if you're in a region where you're doing business with somebody who has to adhere to DORA, and you have implications to that, maybe figuring out what that number is. Like, is this a 10 billion or a $10 million revenue problem for us? And if we
Right.
don't do this, I can now quantify $10 million. That's a real number that a CFO can understand and apply. Is this worth it for us to greenlight this $50,000, $100,000 purchase for $10 million? And they kind of do the revenue numbers and the profits. And maybe, yeah, that makes sense when you kind of lay it out that way.
Yeah, love that. Quantify the risk and the return on investment. Like, what would be the impact to business
Yeah.
continuity? Okay. All right. I think time to talk about the cloud, right? Like we're hearing this a lot. It's not just one cloud, right? There's multiple platforms and a million different ways to deploy them with multiple workflows. Nobody just uses an on-prem data center anymore. People use a mixture of, because nobody's moved, or some very few have moved completely to the cloud, but nobody's completely on the cloud either, right? So it's whether they're using a public cloud or a private cloud, or a SaaS, some sort of SaaS, or a co-location center, edge server. There's tons of different ways that people are running their business. Now, all of this adds to the attack surface. And I'm sure you face this. I'll go to you first, Boo. How are your customers dealing with the increased risks or the increased security requirements, both in like multi-cloud environments and hybrid environments?
Yeah. To your point, your our customers, I think we called this, they never went 100% cloud. And I can think of I can think of a few very smaller organizations that went 100% cloud, but really I have not encountered anybody that went 100% cloud. There's usually some sort of a file server kicking around or something that still exists, or there's going to be like an AS400 that you simply cannot get rid of. Those types of systems, they always exist, and there's always going to be a data center. And so as people moved out, what we saw was that, hey, I'm adopting one of the hyperscalers and I am going to move my security policies over to there. And oh, when I do that, now I need an expert in that particular hyperscaler to apply that security policy and tune that security policy. And you know what? They might not be the same security operations engineer as the one that manages all the on-prem stuff. And they might not be the same security engineer that can manage all of the stuff in the other hyperscaler as well. And so for us, it really played into our multi-cloud story in that we can apply the same controls with our products across the board, whether you're in a hyperscaler, you're in a colo, you're in your on-prem, and that includes things like, and we've invested the time to do this with OPSWAT. And so that whole story, like when we do something on-prem, we want to be able to bring all of that with us, and not just our technologies, but our partners too, because we realize that customers themselves, they're building their own ecosystem of the partners that they work with. And so if they're used to being able to have this support from F5, and in turn we get support from OPSWAT, then that's a value to them. Like, I was out in the field previous to my current role, and that's like something that I can say, hey, we put our name down right beside OPSWAT to be able to make you feel comfortable that we've got your back. Between the three of us together, we'll be able to support you and make sure that you're secure in what we're pitching to you right now. And so we want to make sure that that goes with them out to the different scenarios, and that you're flexible enough that you can architect in different ways. So if you want to do that, great. And you want to pull stuff back, that's great. But your security policies will stay with you that whole time.
So security is not a one and done.
That's a big,
Totally.
One of the good points is having that unified policy, right? There was some lag in getting in some customers moving to the cloud because they didn't have all of the security bits and pieces that they had on-prem. And now that more and more of those services are cloud ready and have the requisite security plugins, now people can start moving forward. And it is important that they maintain policy that whatever you're doing on the desktop can somewhat be matched at the network level. And whether it's stored in AWS or Azure or on-prem, you're able to treat it the same because you have the same desire for those files or for that workflow, that it's all secure.
Yeah. And then it accelerates the business too, right? Because what causes shadow IT and shadow cloud in the first place? It's because people wanted to go somewhere faster than IT and security would let them. And so if you get ahead of that and say, okay, we've established a standard where if you're building an application, you have to have your F5 in front of it, you have to have this WAF policy, you have to have OPSWAT plugged into this, yada, 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 all this is plugged in. And if that's all ready to go and somebody says, hey, I want to go to AWS and I want to do this next week, and I'm going to go with you or without you, you can actually respond and say, yeah, here, just take this. We're ready for it. And you get all the same you get the policies that adhere to us. You get to go into the cloud at your velocity that you want to go through as well. Everybody wins at that point.
Right. And one of the things that I hear about is, there's when people are using a lot of external vendors, right? It's the whole integration challenge. And nobody uses just one or two or three. I think on average, people were using more than 5, and some even like up to those were the outliers. But what do you say to how do people overcome this challenge of integrating the various different security vendors? And I think kind of covered a little bit.
The ball of fire. How do we approach the ball of fire more intelligently is I know something we can help impart.
Yeah, and I know we've been working on our F5 and OPSWAT joint solutions, for a while, and then you've articulated it, wonderfully in your video. That's kind of got viral,
Yeah.
right? So it's a little, I'll just reiterate a little to say that vendors need to work together, and it shouldn't be up to the customer to integrate, because it's a challenge integrating all these different vendor solutions.
Yep.
Yeah, like I said, it comes down to customers are building their own ecosystems. We might have our opinion about an ecosystem that we think that they should adopt and build, but at the same time, we have to leave ourselves open to be able to adopt others. So things like open telemetry, we can't expect people to use F5 as their single pane of glass, to overuse that term, but that's unlikely to be your single place where you're going to see all of your security events. And so what's the solve for that? Things like open telemetry. And so if you're architect, or if you're seeing the world the way that we see it, is that if you can make yourself available to work within an ecosystem like that, then you're giving your customers options to be able to build that ecosystem that eventually, they might not get to single pane of glass either, but at least they have the ability to, if they were able to get alignment across the board, maybe they could one day. But at the very least, we should never hold back and be too opinionated about where people should and shouldn't do things. If we adopt open standards and we play nicely within an ecosystem, which is what we've always been striving to do, whether it's the hyperscalers or something like open telemetry as an example, then yeah, we should be able to provide all the bits and pieces to solve that ball of fire. We can't say that we are the absolute solve for it, but if we block people from integrating other solutions to be that absolute solve, then we're part of the problem.
Well said. Okay.
Great
And
partnership
does this
pitch. I mean, it really is. The seeing how F5 has expanded, with XC, and being able to plug into everything else, and then still have ways to open up to partners like us, partners that do other stuff other than us, because there isn't just one. Like you mentioned, Nav, most people work with a fairly large set of vendors, and that's why we do like talking about things that work together well, because none of us can deliver that 100% silver bullet. So yeah, it is the multi-layered security angle that we do like to talk about, because we're experts in our own thing, and luckily we're also experts in working together, because that's what gives the market a better solution.
And I don't mean to steal your thunder, Adam, but I've heard you say it so often that, hey, we work so well. It literally takes like less than 20 minutes for people to like set it up and be up and away to integrate them, to integrate our solutions into their existing platform. So
absolutely.
I'm going to ask about, like there was a question we asked, if does this change the conversation if you talk about, the 0-day, the much maligned 0-day malware? And we asked people what they're doing. So a lot of them check the right boxes, right? They do have web application firewalls. They do have sandboxes. They do behavioral analysis. They do share threat intelligence. Some even like 13% even are using CDR, but not enough. So, and I think here is where maybe it's a little bit of an education thing, where people are not aware of some of the technologies that are available to them and how they play together to solve different parts of the puzzle. Maybe Adam, you can walk us through that.
Sure. So, we talk about AV in terms of like web application security. Think of it in the perspective of like a file upload, a web portal, a customer portal that F5 is protecting. And let me switch to the right slide. What we offer is seamless integration with network security devices like F5 to provide an offloaded scanning platform for protection against malware, viruses, and all types of 0 days. What really sets our platform apart is that we're using more than one engine, right? We're using more than two AV engines. We're using over 30 different commercial AV engines to scan all these files that are moving through your workflows. We can scan, in general, 10 per second to move through, to go to the back end. And what multi-scanning gives you is, it gives you regional visibility, and it gives you regional specialty, and you combine that so that you get global visibility, right? You get that global ability to know, for instance, On Labs, talk about them all the time. They're based in South Korea, and they have a very good regional specialty for things that might be state-sponsored attacks, from their neighbor to the north. Those attacks may not ever make it to your organization, but the thing is, they're out there looking, and they're adding that, to the whole corpus of things that we can detect, so that when that malware may get modified and somehow be targeted against your organization, or just be spammed out, we already have that intelligence, and we already know how to detect it. And so multi-scanning gives you faster detections, right? It reduces your mean time to detection. It gives you higher accuracy, because like Nav mentioned earlier, there's a difference between scanning something on the endpoint and then scanning something before it gets to the endpoint. We want you to do both, right? We do want you to do both, because endpoint has its own strengths, but it also has some weaknesses, right? And it also relies on files potentially getting to 1,000 or 5,000 users before anything goes into effect. So by integrating with something like F5, you can catch the files as they're going through that choke point, scan them all, scan them the same way that you would want to scan your emails, using the same policy, and getting that, the better breadth and depth of detection using multiple AV engines.
Yeah, and Adam, I'll interject here for people, like, make sure you check, right? So if you'll see detection rate of 99.9% advertised, great, but always check, is that at the endpoint, or is that for static scanning? Because you might be surprised. You might think you're more covered than you actually are.
Yeah, based on our testing, and again, these are all partners. All these AV companies are partners, but they're going to do better sometimes and not better at other times. In static scanning, in our tests, the top one was 76% or 76.4%, something like that, right? It's not quite what is fully advertised, because it's a little bit of apples and oranges. That's really where the benefit of multi-scanning comes through, for that static analysis right there at the choke point, so that you're using multiple sensors worth of definitions to be able to detect those a lot quicker. Now, let me switch to the next slide. Sorry. Okay. So deep CDR kind of goes hand in hand with multi-scanning, right? Multi-scanning takes the things that we know about, the definitions of all of these pieces of malware across the globe, and then we do pattern matching. Essentially, that's how AV engines work. But what if something was just released, right? A 0-day attack. You have to wait a while. You have to wait for On Labs, or you have to wait for McAfee, or you have to wait for CrowdStrike to get one of those files so they can analyze it, create a detection. In many cases, that's too late, right? Because it's already inside your network, and deep CDR is our answer to that gap, that 0-day gap, where it is detectionless, and it does not require, it doesn't require updating on a daily basis. Essentially, what it's able to do is take a look at a file, pull out all the pieces of the file, right? All the pieces of text, all the places where images or other things might be stored, as well as places where active content like JavaScript could be hidden, right? You can embed a JavaScript inside a PDF file. I'm not sure why you would want to do that, but you can, and that's something that AV is not really going to detect. Deep CDR will take all of the pieces that are known to be good in the file, right? All the plain text, all the sanitized images, and then recreate a new file that's 100% safe to use. Deep CDR will be able to detect the or detect the elements in there that could potentially be active, and then not use those to create the new file, right? So no matter where it's hidden, and we can recursively sanitize these files. So if you have something embedded in a Word doc that's then embedded in a PDF, inside 2 different zip files, we can still go down through there, sanitize all of the content in there, and then recreate it and deliver it back to the user with, generally the only thing they see is that the file name has been changed. The file will still work, and any potential active content, whether it's malicious or not, we can remove that from the file.
Right. And I was just going to say that it's not just a question of good or bad, it's also in policy versus out of policy, right? There's no
Right.
reason for your accounting, or I mean, your accounting department might need the macros inside the Excel, but not your HR department, right?
Right.
So it's
Yep.
policy versus out of policy as
Yep.
well.
So how do we do it? How do we do this great integration? And it's through ICAP. It's the Internet Content Adaptation Protocol. Essentially, many decades ago, or at least 2 decades ago, the security market kind of got together and said, we need to do AV scanning. We want to do it at the perimeter, but we don't want to do the AV scanning. How can we come up with a way to let network security devices talk to a third-party scanning system? The ICAP protocol was developed, and it really simplifies the ability for vendors like F5 to take the files that are coming through while they're protecting the web app. They can send over the files that as they do come through, we'll do the scanning, and then we'll come back with a thumbs up, thumbs down, and we can stop any potentially malicious or malicious files right there at the gateway before they reach the web app. ICAP is a plug and play integration, and it really takes about 5 minutes. I say it takes 5 minutes because it really takes about 2 or 3, but we like to put in a little buffer. It's a really very seamless way to connect, right? That's what we like to talk about, is how do we take all the cool stuff that we have and be able to combine it with the cool stuff that our partners have. ICAP is a perfect example of an easy way to do that. Okay.
And I know, and Boo, if you have anything to add to that, or I was actually going to start asking you about what about 2025? What about the future?
Yeah, I mean, specific to this slide, I would just say that I've worked with the folks who, on the F5 side, developed some of this architecture and just made sure it worked because it made sense to do. Like, for us to be able to say that we can protect any app anywhere or any API anywhere, we need to hold true to that. We need to be able to bring folks like OPSWAT along on that, because it's not a complete solution unless we can offer that entire ecosystem. And so, some of the stuff was really just born in the field of people saying, okay, you said you were going to do this. Does it do it? Sure enough, like after you architect it, yeah, it does do it. And so then we can, apply support and our alliance support to that. And so, yeah, totally makes sense. And I would love for, just more people to realize that it's possible to be able to apply all of this everywhere.
Yeah. And we certainly appreciate the partnership. We love it.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. So I think we have a few minutes left, 5 minutes left. So what's next? What's next for application security? What are some of the things you're excited about, worried about, wish people would focus on, or you just want the general, audience to know? I'll start with you first, Boo.
Yeah, for F5, there's this AI buzzword that's going around. Doesn't seem like it's going away. For us, we've been thinking about this for a while. I mean, for us, we've been using machine learning in our products actually for quite a while at this point. But when it comes specifically to AI and addressing AI, we are going to align with the OWASP top 10 for LLMs and generative AI. And in doing so, we've recently announced in early access our AI gateway. And part of that is, obviously we have partners where we want to plug them into that, and it's in early access mode at this, or early access stage right now. So this is the point where we start to develop that kind of stuff. But, again, you have to be able to insert security at the right location. And so things like AI gateway, although AI applications are built on APIs, some of it is very specific. Some of the security is very specific to language models. And so we can pick that out and we can integrate people with our AI gateway. And then otherwise, there's things like connectivity. So especially when it comes to files and people, when they're building AI applications, a very common design pattern right now is retrieval augmented generation. So picking up a whole bunch of files and then replicating it out to different regions, and then having AI, say, requests come in for inference, and having that ability to go request or to be able to go retrieve from your corpus of data in those locations. That data needs to be secured. Those files need to be secured, or those uploads might need to be secured. Just a few weeks ago, I spoke to somebody who was dealing with an organization that was doing resume scanning. And so all of those things come in, and there's real business value because it cut down the lead time to be able to hire people, and it increased the applicants, the level of applicants that they were able to suss out by using this as well. And they were employees that they could see way more potential in. And so there's business value there, but there's also risk with that as well. So we are looking at ways that we can, tie together our ecosystem, bring everyone along, but make sure that we address yet another entry point and attack surface.
I don't know that I can add much to that, Boo. That was great. I mean, we're doing some of the same things from a different perspective. In 2025, definitely with AI, there's some work we're doing. There's always the people that are using the powers for good and the powers for evil, and we are developing an AI assisted or an AI backed capability that that will help us more rapidly be able to adopt different capabilities with DLP, and moving forward with that, because it still does come down to how much personal or private data goes into the LLM, right? And there's a lot of different APIs and a lot of different files, and so being able to plug in like the system that F5 will have with the AI gateway is really a great opportunity for us to take all the stuff that we already do well and then apply it to a whole different ball of wax that is AI, because we still need to do those security things, and so I think 2025 is when we'll start to see more practical AI type security products out there that are a little bit more mass consumable.
Perfect. And I do want to leave at least 5 minutes for questions, so we will wrap it up now. But if you're interested to talk to us more, please reach out to us. Drop it in the chat. We'll, even if we can't get to all the questions today, we will get back to you through email or whatever form of contact you leave for us. So I think for me, the key takeaways are, regardless of like what types of threats, that some of the basic tenets are, education, automation, visibility, the right tools, and then making sure of consistent implementation. So, and then these are some of, so we talked about CDR. There's a great SC Labs report out there that talks about how CDR can actually provide 100% protection, because we are very hesitant to say 100% protection in security. But this is the one time I can, confidently say it.
Yep.
It's tested by outside labs. You can scan and get access to Buu's video that I'd mentioned, and also a copy of the report that we had commissioned Dark Reading and we produced jointly. So having said that, I think everybody, thank you very much. Please feel free to reach out. And if you have a question, ask. or set up some time, and somebody at OPSWAT, an expert at OPSWAT or F5 will get in touch.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.